All right. Thank you for joining me today, Mr. Clark.
Absolutely. Good to see you, man.
Yeah, good to see you as well. I think the goal for this conversation today, you being, still relatively new parent with a second one on the way, and me being a upcoming new parent, that I thought I would pick your
Right.
brain a bit
For
and
sure.
start to run some of these, financial planning for new parent questions past you.
I love it. Yeah, we see it a lot, Zach. I'm sure as you know, with our clients, seems like folks are, this is a common question, a common thing that clients are going through, which is awesome. Because for one, we're talking about the financial situation here, but obviously just the birth of a new child is super exciting. That sometimes the financial aspect can be kind of easy to push to the side. But I think our hope today is to show that maybe planning ahead of time, like before the baby even gets here, can hopefully relieve some stress once the baby gets here and just allow the parents to enjoy that time and rest up as
That's
well.
right. Yeah. And as exciting as the time as it is and can be, I also think it can be a very overwhelming time as well because,
Yeah,
as you're becoming a new parent and even when you become a new parent, there are a lot of new things to you and there's a lot of things to tackle prior to the birth of the child. So, I think hopefully some of the conversation that we will have today can alleviate some of that stress and point people in the right direction.
absolutely. I would also, as a it's kind of a precursor to our audience. Obviously, this is so much to discuss on this. We could have a video for probably each topic we're going to discuss, but this is hopefully just to raise awareness, right? And then if you have more questions, you can reach out to us, go to our website, or you can email me, Nolan at leadingedgeplanning.com or Zach at leadingedgeplanning.com.
That's right. Yeah. I think I'll just kind of start with where I'm at then, if that makes the most sense.
Love it.
I to give a little bit of background, as you know, of course, but I have my wife and I have our first kid on the way due this September. And I thought it would make sense once again to loop you into this because you've kind of gone through this life phase recently. And so for my first question I'd like to run past you is, you know, try to put yourself back in my shoes where you were just a few years ago. And at this point in your life, what would you say are the things that come to mind in terms of, planning now, starting to get things finalized now as a new parent prior to the birth of the first kid?
Absolutely. Well, I love how you said planning it like when you find out you're going to be expecting, right? I mean, it's great to plan regardless, but like by the time the baby gets there, it's just a little harder, right? Because you just have less time, and time is always helpful, not only for investing, but just obviously we're talking about now with saving up. So, hopefully you got about 8 to 9 months there to be able to give yourself a little cushion. So the first thing I was thinking of was probably an emergency fund. We had one in place, but when it was just my wife and I after we first got married, we didn't have as big of an emergency fund as we do now because we have an additional child, another life, in our household. And so I think that warrants potentially looking at the budget, looking at, what do we spend every month? And maybe your emergency fund doesn't have to be 6 months of what you spend every month, but at least like the basic necessities, right? Because let's say you did lose your job, you're probably not going to spend as much money each month as you do when you do have a job, right? So just making sure you can at least pay the rent or the mortgage, utilities, food, gas, all, just kind of the essentials. So I would say that life insurance, that's a pretty big one, right? So you can do that before the child gets there. It's not something that you have to wait for the child to be born. So making sure each parent is covered. Now, the amounts, kind of like the same as the emergency fund, those amounts may need to be bumped up a little bit, but I would say just having some life insurance is a good start. I know for our pilots, a lot of them have, some insurance already available to them, that's of no cost already through the company, which is awesome. And then maybe just looking at some additional on top of that. And I would say estate planning documents, Zach, which those are, I would say the life insurance, and estate planning, those are probably the hardest things to get around to. It seems, just not, like personally, and then also for our clients. I think I see that. And so a lot of the airlines, again, they offer sometimes free or a lower cost estate planning option where you can call like a group number through MetLife, for example. I know Southwest does that. I think some of our other airlines do as well. But you call this group number, you tell them what area of the country you're in, and then they'll shoot you like five names of attorneys that are in your area to get that done. Um, and even if the child's not born yet, they can at least put in the estate plan or will that like, hey, whoever, if you both passed away as a couple, then the child or future children would go to this couple, a guardian that you have listed on that document. And so you don't even have to have the name of the kid on there yet. You could at least just put all future children or something like that. Your attorney will help you with that. But again, these could all be videos in and of themselves. What do you think about that,
That's right.
Zach?
Yeah, there's a lot to kind of dive into there that, like you said, we could have a conversation all day long about this. But to kind of
Yeah.
just point back to some of the things you said, to repeat it back to you, one would be take a look at the budget,
Yep.
get that more updated, start to plan ahead. Two would be, and in no particular order here, but just
Right.
numbering these off. Two would be life insurance, making sure you're covered for your surviving spouse and now future children.
Right.
And three, we need to make sure that there are some estate planning documents in place. Um, Pretty generalized documents, most likely, just to cover future children being born.
Yep. Love it.
Right. Yep. So let's actually talk on some of these with the budget. I think a lot of the clients I've worked with in the past, they hear the word budget and they're like, "Ah, I'm not doing that." I
Yeah.
wouldn't even know where to start. That's what I hear pretty commonly, and I get it because I've been there too. Just to kind of give some background on budgeting, I started, after I graduated college, just doing it myself, spreadsheeting it, recording every transaction there, categorizing it myself. Once I got married, I quickly found out it's going to take way too long to continue to do it that way.
You
And
mean Bailey
so,
didn't want to do that? The
right, no,
spreadsheet.
she wasn't a big fan of that. And so then my process was I need to figure out a way to automate this, right? To make it easier on myself. So I went through a number of different planning softwares online, and I found a number of good ones. I'd be happy to help anybody with a recommendation there based on what they're looking for. But I think ultimately my goal was finding a budget that one caught all the transactions for me, right? And then correctly categorized them. And two, limited the amount I actually have to spend on updating my budget.
Yep.
Um, I don't know if you've gone through a similar process or not, but I found one that I'm a pretty big fan of, particularly because it's the only budget that correctly categorizes credit card expenses and paying off the credit card. So if you're a person that uses a credit card for the points and then you pay it off at the end of, every month or something along those lines, a lot of budgets have issues with um, correctly capturing that, right? It'll
Yeah.
kind of double count as an expense when that's not actually what's happening. The one I found was Quick and Simplify. It was a pretty good one to that is correctly capturing, using the credit card for the points, but then paying it off at the end of each month. I spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes every, 3 days just making sure transactions are correctly categorized and updated, and then it does the work for me.
I love it. That's great. Yeah, that's a common issue. I've dealt with that myself with like that it doesn't categorize the credit cards correctly or it'll double count
Right.
that. So that's awesome. Zach, what would you say for folks who are like, yeah, I believe you, but still don't want to still don't want to do it? It's like,
Yeah.
is there another alternative for those folks out there?
I think there is. I think one thing I'll say before people start to rule out the budget is don't go into a budget expecting that by the end of the first month you will have a correct budget outlined and you're ready to go because that takes a lot of work and time. I usually tell people when they start a budget that the goal shouldn't necessarily be to immediately finalize said budget, but to just start to correctly capture expenses. And then after a few months of going through the process, making sure things are categorized correctly, you then start to take a look back at the previous months and say, oh, here's what I'm actually spending. Now I have a better grasp of what my income versus expenses are. And once you're in that place, I think everything becomes a lot more clear and you can start to plan ahead a lot more efficiently. Um, Going back to your question, if you're just totally, ruling out, I don't want a budget whatsoever, I think at least getting a better understanding of income versus expenses should be a priority because if you can at least identify here's what is left over at the end of each month after groceries, gas, utilities, 401k contributions, all that, then that's a good starting point, and then we have a place to work with. But until you can get at least a little bit of a better understanding, it becomes really hard to plan for the months ahead, especially when you have a kid on the way. So,
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of flows into all these other things, right? Of like, if you don't know your spending, then you may have trouble like determining an emergency fund or life insurance amounts or, all kinds of things, right? Because it's just important to have a grasp
that's right.
on that. It doesn't have to be to the penny, right? But like you said, just kind of a broad understanding for
Right.
sure, at least. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. And a broad understanding takes you a long way. Once again, I think
absolutely.
once you have that baseline understanding of income versus expenses, something like a budget becomes a lot more palatable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Next, I want to kind of talk on life insurance. You had mentioned that in your answer too. I think there's a lot of conversation I've had with new parents, upcoming new parents, with regard to the whole life versus term life conversation, or not whole life in particular, but let's say permanent life insurance versus term life insurance.
Mhm.
Do you have any general thoughts on, especially for a new parent, early career, whether what makes the most sense in that setting, term versus permanent?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one, as you mentioned, we do get a lot. I think with anything really, Zach, with whether it's retirement planning or in this case, life insurance, we always like to start with the end in mind, right? To determine like how do we choose between all these options? Because again, man, we could do an hour longer video on insurance because like you said, there's whole life, variable, universal life, all kinds of things that our clients see and read online. And so we begin with the end in mind with life insurance. What I think for most clients they want, and this is a generalization, of course, but that it's like, well, if I passed away, and I'll just speak for myself at least, if I pass away, I want to make sure that my income or a portion of it is replaced, so my wife can continue to to raise our boy and live in our house and live somewhat of a normal life compared to what she is right now. That's the hope. Obviously, with my age, I would have to have a ton of life insurance to probably ensure like that she didn't have to worry about money the rest of her life. I don't know if many people can do that. So our hope is like, okay, let's for one, she can like mourn and grieve and not have to worry about money. So like having enough to at least do that. And then for us, like, we're thinking paying off any debts, like the mortgage. And then, for private schooling is a goal for us. And then college. So being able for her to afford those things for our child, that's to at least help with some of that. So that's like when we were thinking about it, that was the end goal. And then it becomes like, okay, how can we do that in a cost effective manner? And that's where term is can really be a good option, Zach, because it's for the reason it's called term is because it's for a set number of years that you're insured. So for us, and with our age, we did 30 years because we got a longer time horizon, right? Like we're just now starting to have kids, we're younger. So we wanted to make sure we were insured for quite a while. And then people may say, well, what happens after the term is over? Well, hopefully by that point, we have other assets saved up. Our mortgage is paid off, hopefully, other things that the need is not as much. But as a younger couple, you need a ton, but then you may not have as much money as you will in the future, which is why you would want a lower premium. So the premiums are typically a set amount based on health. You'll get like a health assessment. I know they came here, took some blood, like, do all that stuff. And then they're like, this is going to be your rate based on your health. And then it is the same amount monthly for the whole 30 years. And it's a pretty inexpensive amount for a good amount of coverage. Now, if someone has health issues, that's where maybe some of these other policies could be good, but that's just kind of a broad way of how I'm thinking about it, Zach. But what would you add to that? What if anything I missed?
Yeah, no, I think you gave a great description there. I tend to lean toward term insurance too, especially for younger couples.
Yeah.
I think the primary goal, you had mentioned 30 years. Obviously, as a general rule of thumb, the longer the term is, especially as new parents, and the greater the death benefit, right? That's kind of a helps you sleep at night thing. I don't
Yep.
think the risk of being overinsured is the same as the risk of being underinsured. Um,
Right.
those are completely different problems. But just from a general point, I think the main goal in my mind would be getting the kid to age 18. If you can at least ensure that portion, that's going to be, in my opinion, the more expensive years during a child's life,
Mhm.
especially if, one spouse is a stay-at-home person, um, then the life insurance death benefit becomes a lot more important, right?
Right.
Because then you're totally replacing income for, 15 to 20 years. I think you made a good point too that a lot of people overlook is you have to keep in mind the current debts when analyzing your death benefit amount. I think a lot of people just look at, income replacement. So, well, if I were to live for the next 20 years, receive this as a, average raise year to year, here's what I need for a death benefit. But really, you have to add on to, what is the current death benefit amount and potentially what will it be in 10 to 20 years, right?
Right.
Um, because that is a major expense. And if something were to happen to you, but you had a death benefit large enough to, immediately pay off the mortgage, and then Claire were to be able to live off of the rest of the life insurance proceeds for the next 10 to 20 to 30 years, well, you did a good job setting up your life insurance in that scenario.
Right.
So those are
Absolutely.
just the general thoughts I have. I think there is a time and place for permanent, but like you had mentioned, I don't necessarily think it's during the earlier years of your career for the
Right.
most part, because of the difference in premium when you compare term insurance versus a permanent policy.
Absolutely. And last thing I'll add is that, I talked about from my perspective, like, for our household, ensuring my income, but I think it's very important as well. Sometimes we see this that like maybe if one spouse earns higher than the other, then they make sure that spouse is insured, but then they don't insure the other potentially. Like maybe if someone's staying at home with the kids or anything like that, sometimes I've seen where they don't insure that. And while they may not be bringing home a paycheck in that sense. Obviously, as we all know, it's hard work, and if the spouse wasn't there, they're going to have to pay someone to watch kids, right,
That's
while
right.
they go back to working. Because for a lot of our pilots, I'll use as an example, their retirement is hinging upon them going back to work at some point and continuing to work. And so if their spouse passed away, it would be pretty pivotal to at least have some amount so that way they could afford childcare and do all these other things. So I think it's at least worth having something, even if a spouse, works in the home.
Definitely. And, that's a great point that I think a lot of people overlook. In that scenario, you can, if you have any general thoughts on this, let me know too. But in that scenario, I don't think the term is as important to be as long as what you had mentioned,
Yeah.
because a career goes on for your life, right, until
Yeah.
retirement. But really, the goal there would be an insurance amount to cover um, daycare costs prior to schooling, in my
Hmm.
opinion.
Yeah.
Assuming that schooling is, free, public
Right.
schooling, whatever. But
Yeah.
those first, call it 5 years, are probably the most expensive, just because of daycare costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, we hear that a lot, of, man, daycare is
Yeah.
expensive, or preschool, and it is. And especially depending upon where you live. So yeah, having some extra money for that wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, yeah. I had coworkers one time that they had a kid about to go into the public schooling system, because they became old enough, and they were excited because it was like they're getting a pay raise because daycare costs are ending.
No kidding. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I believe it.
So Nolan, another topic I wanted to talk about, because at least it's been a big one with my wife and I, ever since we found out that we were going to become parents, is the health insurance conversation. I'll kind of give you our situation, and then I'll run the question past you. But from our perspective, I work, my wife works. Our employers both offered health insurance plans, right? Um, we spent a lot of time going through, my or my health insurance plan, her employer's health insurance plan. And to be honest with you, it really wasn't easy to make a decision because they were both good plans, but they did have very different co-insurance amounts, deductibles.
Yeah.
Like our health insurance was like the higher deductible one, theirs was a higher premium one.
Yeah.
Um, so it was kind of difficult to make a decision. I'll basically tell you what it came down to was the total out-of-pocket maximum, which I think is what a lot of people overlook.
Yeah.
In that a high deductible health plan is more likely to be more money out of pocket um, when everything goes right, in a sense, right? Normal birth, everything goes perfect. You're home in 2 to 3 days. I think what people overlook oftentimes is this out-of-pocket maximum. And then you start to look at, well, what if everything goes wrong and we're in the NICU for a month, 2 months? Which plan are we going to pay more on here? I don't know. I'm kind of, giving a lot of general statements here. Do you have
Yeah.
any, thoughts on, choosing the correct health insurance plan, what to watch out for, anything like that?
Yeah, this may, I hate to say maybe the most important one because these are all so important, but I'm just thinking of like, getting that baby born is really important and you
Right.
do it at the hospital, right? So or wherever you do it at. So Zach, you mentioned if everything went right, then a high deductible plan could be good, right? But I was even thinking even when it does go right with having a baby, it's still expensive. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like it's
Right.
crazy. Like I mean, this is just us being nerds here. I'm sure you'll do the same thing. But whenever John Shepard was born, I remember keeping like all the receipts and like at the end of it, like after we were home at some point, it's like adding up like if we would not have had insurance, like how much is just the birth of a baby cost in the hospital. And it was pretty straightforward situation for us. Thankfully, he was healthy. Claire was healthy, and then we were able to go home after a day or two. But it would have been $30,000, if not maybe a little more, if we did not have insurance. And we probably ended up paying about, 2,500, $3,000, maybe a little more for the whole thing. But just back to your point of how to think through this, man. It's like an alphabet soup, or however you want to put it, with all these words of you got the deductibles, out of pocket max, co-insurance. I mean, it's we're definitely not insurance experts, I would say, but we do deal with this a lot. We did take classes on this. And so I guess when you're having a baby, that your health costs are for sure almost going to be more than what they were probably beforehand, right? When it was just you or you and your spouse, because that's just how it is when a baby's born. So knowing that, you just know your expenses are going to be more. So I think planning for that, looking at that out of pocket maximum, like you mentioned, is super important because to me, when I think insurance, I think of like worst case scenarios. I'm like, how can I insure myself against the worst case, right? That's kind of what we do for like homeowners insurance, right? Like you don't get homeowners insurance because you think the best things are going to happen. You
Right.
get them
Yeah.
because you plan for the worst case, right? Even though it may never happen. And then was it a waste that you got it if nothing ever happened to your home? I mean, no, it's like great, we didn't have to use it. Like that's
Yeah.
good too, right? Like we didn't have a tornado hit our home or a hailstorm or fire or whatever it may be.
Right.
Same with cars. And so, anyways, I think of health insurance the same way. I mean, that's just me. I mean, it can be looked at in a lot of different ways. But the out of pocket maximum is just a number. I'll use 10,000 for example. If your out of pocket maximum says $10,000, and that's for in network too, that's important, right? So making sure
Hmm.
your hospital is in network. That means that the most in a calendar year that you could spend on insurance is $10,000.
Right.
So that kind of brings me peace sometimes. Is like oh, there's all kinds of different numbers here. You got the deductibles, co-insurance, but it's like, man, if I can just know that out-of-pocket maximum, that could be a good number to maybe plan maybe your emergency fund around, or
Right.
it could. Now, again, that's pretty rare, probably that someone spends that, but I mean, you just never know. So I mean, that could be nice to know. I like how you kind of just broke it down, but hey, that's an important number to look at because sometimes that can be missed. Now one other thing is you're going to have a low deductible plan or a high deductible plan. And so typically the high deductible plans are cheaper. premiums. So what you pay monthly is probably going to be a little more affordable than a low deductible plan. And the reason that is because your out of pocket maximum on a high deductible plan is going to be much higher. So yeah, you may be paying less per month. And if someone's healthy and maybe they're not going to have a baby in a calendar year, then that could be a good plan because you can get a health savings plan most of the time. And that's a whole nother conversation. But most of the time, what we see, if someone knows they're going to have a baby, they're going to have this big expense, it probably makes sense to maybe get a lower deductible because you're going to hit that deductible quicker and you'll probably end up paying less overall because the out of pocket max is lower. Again, the deductible is lower. But that was a lot, Zach.
Yeah,
How would you
that was
summarize that?
great. Yeah, and I have maybe a few thoughts. I think one thing I'll give just as an example from my own situation that we figured out
Hmm.
is kind of like you were talking about when you're, a new parent, your early career for the most part. Um, you look at these health plan options, the low deductible plan versus the high deductible plan. And just in my own mind, prior to looking at any health plans that my wife and I had to make a decision on, it was like, well, a high deductible plan probably does not make sense for us in this year, right? Because we're having a baby, we almost never have health costs, but this year we're guaranteed to have some. So maybe it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to do the high deductible plan. But this is why it's super important to actually look into the details of the plans. Because although one plan option we had was the high deductible plan, the other being the low, I could have just made a split decision there and said, oh, we'll go on the low deductible plan, right? We're having a baby this year. Once I dug into the details, actually, it was kind of a unique situation because the high deductible plan actually had a lower out of pocket maximum amount. And I think that's where it gets people sometimes is, uh, you know, we kind of go back to this if everything goes right versus if everything goes wrong. If everything goes right, I'm sure you're out of pocket less on the lower deductible, higher premium plan.
Right.
You're in and out of the hospital in 1 to 2 days. Great, you didn't pay that much. If everything goes wrong, actually, still with that lower deductible plan, we would have been out a few $1,000s more in that year.
Yeah.
So in that situation, it was actually a little bit of a safer bet for us to go with the higher deductible plan, right? For one, because it offered the HSA, so there was an additional savings component there that could help us save for some of these associated healthcare costs with the upcoming kid.
Right.
But two, mainly because it had that lower out-of-pocket maximum amount. Um,
I love that because it just shows the complexities sometimes of really all these things we're talking about, right? That's why sometimes I watch videos and I get tired of like, people being like, we can't, this is just a generalization. We can't make blanket statements, but it's so true, right? That's why we can't get on here and say, if someone's having a baby, then a low deductible plan
right,
is right
exactly.
for you. We can't say that because you just mentioned a perfect example where maybe in your all's case that was not because every employer has different options and what may be a low deductible and what this employer thinks is good insurance, this company may have even better on a high deductible, right? So it's
Yeah,
so that's why we just encourage if you're a client watching this, reach out to us and we're able to actually dig into your documents, help out and make it more personal to you. If you're not a client, still reach out and we're
that's right.
happy to help and see if, it's a good fit and we can help out in any way. But did you have anything else
I have
on that, Zach?
two points
Yeah.
kind of to make off something you said there. One, you mentioned network earlier. That was kind of another uniqueness part to our situation because Nolan and I we're both river rats. We live right on the Ohio
That's right.
River. Um, so my wife actually works in Indiana, even though we live in Kentucky. That's something to be aware of in a situation like that is because
Yeah.
once we dug into her health plan, that network being in Indiana is very different from even though we're right across the river from
Yeah.
what we had available in this health plan. So that's just once again something to be aware of. It's something to make sure you've crossed off the list in terms of research. Another thing we're doing, this is just kind of personal practice, is when I was looking at the health plans, I'm running different scenarios. Well, what if we're in the hospital 2 days, right?
Yeah.
What's the amount I'm expected to pay versus on this plan versus this plan? What if we're in the hospital for 2 months? What am I expected for this plan versus this plan? I then kind of had to take a step back and be like, well, there's certain things in life that you really can't plan specifically on. So
Right.
what's going to help us sleep at night? And the answer for my own situation was, um, let's once again go back to this out-of-pocket maximum. And then on top of our already existing emergency fund, let's just go ahead and save that amount up. Let's just go
Yep.
ahead and put it aside. That way, no matter what happens, we know we're covered in terms of out-of-pocket costs. If we're there for 2 months, we already have the money saved. If we're there for 2 days, well, it didn't cost as much as we planned, and we have a little bit extra. So it was kind of a win-win either way for us.
Right.
That's kind of the way I'm looking at it for my own situation.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that just brings so much peace of mind.
Right.
Um, and I like how you said too, it's very hard with especially insurance to really plan things like down to the penny. And I know that's our nature, of course. That's why we
Right.
do what we do. But I found that too. And that was something I was going to say was that whatever you think the amount is going to be, I'm just speaking in general, right? For our viewers and probably for you and for me as well, for our next baby, is that probably going to be more than what I kind of, I know like when people buy a home or they buy a vehicle, or even when people guess what they spend per month, it's always more than what
Yeah.
they think,
Right.
right? Like, what you
Yeah.
spend a month, you say it, and then they actually look at the numbers and it's like, oh man, that was like a couple $1,000s off, or So it's like that's kind of what I found with like the birth of a child. Now insurance is very nice because you can at least, like you mentioned, like kind of know like a range of at least this is for sure what I would
You can give it a
spend.
ceiling.
Yeah, it's right. And so
Yeah.
that's nice to know. So yeah, anyways, yeah, there's just a lot there and it's probably going to be more than what we always expect. So planning ahead is definitely super important. Now, I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but and again, this may be the like most important one or maybe the one that people are talking about the most. And so I had two other things. One thing that I've seen this happen in my family and with clients is that if it can get really complex if someone is still on their parents' insurance.
Yes.
Let's say the mother is on the parents' insurance. She is 26 or younger. Actually, Zach, do you know if it's when you turn 26?
When you turn 26, you're no longer eligible to be on
Okay.
the parents. So younger than
Yeah,
26.
younger than
Yeah.
26. If someone's younger than 26 and they have the baby and they're on their parents' insurance, then the baby is not covered under the mom's insurance because the mom is covered under the parents.
Right.
So that can be a real problem, right? So, well, shoot, who's the baby covered under? So in that case, it may make sense to not be on the parents' insurance, or if your spouse has insurance, I guess just making sure the baby's covered. I guess is
Yeah.
my. It's going to look very different, but that's just something to like, if your spouse is below 26 and they're on their parents' insurance, then that should kind of get the alarm bells going, maybe
That's
to
right.
assess your situation.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, did you have another thing? I didn't mean to
I
interrupt
was just
you.
saying one more thing, but I would love to hear if you had anything on that or seen.
Yeah, I was gonna just add to that. Once again, to go back to our my own personal situation, because all of this is so recent with me too,
Hmm.
figuring out the insurance stuff. That was another item that we delved into was my wife is actually, younger than 26. So she was actually still eligible to be on her parents' health
Yeah,
plan. Just to cross it off the list, we called that health insurance plan and said, hey, now my wife is pregnant. Is she still covered under this plan for, all of the mother related expenses prior to
right,
having the baby? They said, yeah, absolutely. She's a dependent of her dad, who was the owner of the health insurance plan and or the premium payer of the health insurance
right,
plan. Where they will get you is that dependents of dependents are often not covered. And I've
exactly.
actually I've actually known people that have run into that exact situation because that's not necessarily a question you would think to ask, but it is
Right.
so important.
Yeah, you think if you'd say that, my wife's pregnant, that would kind of lend
Yeah.
itself to share that information. But yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not that clear. And I've seen that too. It's like it just must not be something they clearly state. So
The
that's probably
misconception comes from, when during the birth of your child, you my wife, for instance, will have medical related costs, right, for delivery.
Yeah.
What you don't think about is that then there's a separate bill that is credited to your baby. It's
Yes.
like the baby is the bill payer then.
Yeah.
And so the insurance companies will look at that and say, well, let's say my wife stayed on her dad's health insurance plan, those costs would be covered under his health insurance plan, but anything related to the baby would not because it's a dependent of a dependent.
Yeah. I love it. No,
Yeah.
it's so, I mean, it's so important. It's one that's not easily caught because like you said, you called and you would think that, oh, like we're good. But so anyway, that's why we're mentioning it. And the other thing, Zach, which I don't know if we're gonna have this later, but just when the baby is born, the baby does not automatically just get thrown onto your insurance, right? Like you have to, most of the time it's about 30 days. There's a 30-day window you have to add your baby to whatever health insurance plan that whether it's I don't know if sometimes people use two health insurance plans if it's a husband and wife, but if you have one that you're using, making sure the baby is added to whichever health insurance plan you want. And I kind of chuckle because for me, we do this for a living. And I think I did it on like day 28. I'm not kidding. That's an awful example. I mean, you're just so busy, right? I mean, you're tired,
Right.
you're like sleep deprived, you're so happy, all these stuff. And I mean, I remember it was like day 27, 28. I was like, shoot, I got to do this. And it was like a Friday, I think, and I got it done. But I will not. I'm speaking to myself here. I will not wait that long for the second one. Usually, it just requires you can either log into your insurance portal and you can say life-changing event, add a dependent, something along those lines, or
Yep.
you can make a call. So it's probably a little different for every insurance provider, but if you call that, it's pretty obviously it happens all the time, so there shouldn't be any issues there.
Yeah.
But anything to add to that?
That's great. That was kind of my last note as well. It's just on the health insurance side, making sure that after the child is born, you go back and add said child to whatever health insurance plan you choose, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you had kind of mentioned it as well. Maybe there's a situation where the correct decision for, let's say you and Claire was if you and Claire both had different employer
Yeah.
provided plans, maybe you both went on separate ones. There's another conversation to be had there on which is the correct one to add the baby to, right? But
Yes.
that's kind of another rabbit hole that honestly, you can cross off uh, or check some check boxes when you get to that based on, well, how much have you already spent on each health plan? What are the out-of-pocket maximums on each? What is the difference or specific coverage amounts for each? Either way, I think having multiple health plans can sometimes be advantageous.
One last thing I thought about, and the mothers, if they're watching, or they will thank me because short-term disability policies, those are really important because maternity leave, right? If you're, I'll just use Claire as an example. She was with the school system. It was 3 to 4 weeks of paid leave. So we knew that. And that's probably something to check on too, right? Because even if they allow you, think to her, they allow you to take 12 weeks, but you only get paid like 3 to 4. So that could be a shock, right? Like if you just
Right.
hear, oh yeah, you're allowed to do 12, then some people may think like, oh, we just get paid the whole time. So checking for one, how long is the paid portion? And if it's not, sometimes, I mean, every company has different policies. I've seen some people get 8 months of maternity leave, which is just awesome. I mean, mothers they go through it, right? So,
Yeah.
but let's say it's 12, figure out what you get paid. And if it's not the whole 12 weeks, then look into a short-term disability policy. And what that will do is you pay, usually, Zach, it's a pretty low amount. Like I think for Claire, we paid $15 a month and it covered her from the 4 week period to that 12. So she was able to take off the whole 12 weeks and still get paid through this short-term disability policy because birth counts as as a short-term disability. And then it won't be the whole salary amount, but it was pretty close. I mean, I think it was like
Yeah.
80% of her paycheck. It's enough to like really makes a difference, right? I mean, we didn't have to dig into like emergency funds or anything like that. Like we were good. And so I would just add that, for folks, obviously every company's different, but just looking into that how much do you get paid during your maternity leave? And if you don't get paid the whole time, then maybe sign up for a short-term disability policy.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just a few things to add to that. I know with employer provided short-term disability policies, the policy has to be active for X amount of days before you can use this benefit. With employer plans, it seems to be about 90 days on average is what I'm seeing.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Then something to be aware of though is that sometimes people will have an employer that doesn't offer short-term disability. And so, like you said, maybe you go out and buy a private short-term disability policy. But what people are often caught by surprise on is the private ones have much longer elimination periods, which means, let's say, my wife and I didn't have access to short-term disability whatsoever through my employer, through hers. So the day she becomes, we find out she's pregnant, we go out and we buy a short-term disability policy so that she can use for when she has the baby.
Right.
Well, a lot of these private short-term disability policies are structured in a way for people to not be able to do that, which is, you can't just get pregnant and then go out and buy a short-term disability so that you get a benefit
Yeah.
when you have the baby. Oftentimes, these policies have to be active for about a year before
Hmm.
you can ever reap any benefit for them. So if you're in a situation where your employer doesn't offer short-term disability or paid, maternal leave, anything like that, it becomes very important to actually potentially shop for a short-term disability policy before you ever actually, become pregnant, way before you will need the benefit. Because for these private ones, they're going to have to be active a lot longer of a period of time before you can start to receive income from them.
It's a great point. Yeah. So again, just like with everything else, these are the nuances with this
Yeah,
stuff is just it's crazy. So, if you're watching this, definitely reach out to us.
yeah.
We'll happy to help out.
Okay. I think now that we've talked about, once you figure out you're pregnant, what's the things to start planning for? Then we've talked about the health insurance stuff. So that kind of takes care of right before the birth, at the birth, and then, kind of immediately after. I think then my mind starts to go, okay, now I'm at this point where I have my first child, everything's good. But as a financial planner, I start thinking of savings, right? All right, what do I need to start doing now? And this is a question I've been wanting to ask you because it's something I kind of bounce back and forth with,
Right.
is the future savings for my kid. I want to save for my kid to help my kid out when he, becomes 18 and let's say joins the workforce or goes to college. But
Hmm.
I think the issue I run into there is I can't tell you he or she is going to do, right?
Yep.
I don't know if he or she is going to go to college. I don't know if they're going to just go straight into the workforce. I don't know what is going to be the majority decision 18 to 20 years from now.
Yep.
So then my mind starts to go, well, what's the right way to save? Is it an UGMA brokerage, just a general brokerage, 529? Do you have any kind of general thoughts on, without any of these certainties able to be answered, what is the right, maybe most efficient way to save for my kid?
Yeah, I love it. I went through the same thing, and I would first say that the fact that you're thinking about it, or if someone's watching this video, like the fact you're watching this and hearing this and interested in saving potentially for your child, I mean that's a win in itself to me. I think, right? Like, I don't know if there is like, it's hardly ever that there's like this is the absolute right account to save in because there's so many options, like you said, that it really comes down to the goal of the account, which can be hard to know, Zach, as you mentioned, because like, what's this kid gonna be doing in 18 years, right? It's hard to kind of envision that. And so that will determine a lot, probably what the right account is, right? Because generally, if someone's like my child or future children, because some of these accounts, like a 529, you can pass down, even if one kid doesn't go to college, you can use it
Right.
for the other kids. So let's say I like to think about scenarios. So if you know your kid's going to go to college, I mean, obviously no one knows, right? But if you feel pretty confident, or like that at least one of your kids will, probably makes sense to save in a 529 at least. if you don't think, if you're pretty dead set on like, I don't know if they'll go to college, even if they do, like, I just want them to have ultimate flexibility. Like, I hear that a lot of like, 529, I get it. There's tax advantages for, if you live in certain states, that's okay. Like, I prefer flexibility over anything. Then that's probably, you mentioned a broker, like a taxable brokerage for a kid. That's called a UTMA or an UGMA, as you mentioned. So that would probably be a pretty good fit. I sometimes like to maybe you just save them both, right? I mean, that'd be kind of nice because you mentioned we don't know the future for our kids. We also don't know future legislation or taxes or those things. So could be nice to have like a little bit of both, right?
Right.
And I actually just wrote an article, Zach. I think I was telling you on. It's titled Trump accounts, but really it's kind of just about savings vehicles for children in general. So we'll include the link to that in
Yeah.
the description. But one of the things that I put in there was just how, again, maybe it's not about as much of like the account, because I think parents, when they get to that time, if they've saved something, they feel a lot better than people who've saved like nothing, right? Like usually they're not
Right.
like, oh, I'm glad I saved in this account. They're just like, hey, I'm glad I saved something. Right.
Yeah.
So I think the lesson for me is that small, consistent action compounds. And then, I did, if someone invested $15 a month over 18 years at a 10% return, that adds up to about $7,000. Now, $7,000 is not going to pay for your kid's college. But that just is an example that a small amount will add up to something. So maybe
Yeah.
you could start there and then you could keep going up. And I'll just end on this, and then I'm going to pass it back to you. I actually have two more things. One is that the Trump account, that's a new one. Again, I did a whole article on it, so we won't go into the nuances of it. But if your child is born, let me get the dates here, between January 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2028, they're eligible for a $1,000 pilot contribution from the U.S. Treasury. So you don't have to do anything except open the account. You can do that when you file your taxes. You can get on the Trump account website and open it. And that goes live in May of this year, May, and then it'll be funded in July for children born January 1st, 2025 till 2028. But anyways, I mean, in our mind, Zach, it's like get the free $1,000, even if you don't save another dime in the Trump account. You got having $1,000 is better than not having $1,000, right? No
That's
matter
right.
the amount. So and I'll just, as I mentioned, I'll end on this. Um, I actually don't know who this quote is attributed to. I saw it somewhere, but saving in an imperfect account beats spending years searching for the perfect one and never opening anything. So someone wisely put it, America doesn't have a savings crisis because people chose the wrong accounts because many don't save at all. So I think you should back to that point, like just
That's a
do
great
something.
point.
So I'll pass it back to you. What do you think? Does that give you any peace at all, or what kind of things are you considering?
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I think just from my own experience, when I've talked with, it's different now that I'm in this scenario, but I've given
Right.
advice on this exact question
Yeah.
before. And I've worked with different new parents and given different advice based on what they've told me, right?
Yeah.
I've worked for, a new parents who just had a kid that said, "Hey, we want to start saving for our kid. What's the right account to do it?" And you start to ask them questions. Well, what's the goal of the money? Well, they say, well, if they go to college, I want to be able to pay for their college. And then I usually defer to the question, well, what if they don't go to college? Is that money going back to you, or is that money going, is it kind of a, well, you didn't go to college, so here's the money
Yeah.
to your kid to use on as that kid wants to. I think the answers differ a little bit, and I
Oh
think
yeah.
largely it depends on if there's a second kid involved, because then if that second kid goes to college, like you had mentioned, you can just roll that initial 529 to, let's say, a 529 in the other kid's name as a
Yeah.
beneficiary, or even just change beneficiaries. Either way, my advice depends on a lot of what parents will tell me during some of these questions. I worked with another couple one time that they said, hey, I didn't go to college. My wife didn't go to college. Pretty rural area. They said, if this kid is anything like us, they're going to have no interest in college, right? So then my goal is to just on their 18th or 21st birthday, whatever the exact age is, give them X amount. We want to have X amount saved up by then so that I can help them with a few things. college if they want to go, a down payment,
Yeah,
new car, something along those lines. Getting
absolutely.
started is mainly the conversation there. If that's the answer, I tend to lean a little more toward the brokerage because, like you had
Hmm.
mentioned, it offers more flexibility. It's not tailored to specifically college, but it can be used on college if that becomes a thing. I think the last thing to keep in mind there, it's like for you and I, we live in Kentucky. So it's a little trickier with us because there's no state deduction for
Right.
529 contributions. I think depending on the state you're in, the answer becomes a lot more clear depending on if there is a deduction available. But for
Hmm.
you and I, there isn't. So
Right.
then it's kind of like, well, once again, it goes back to those questions I will ask. Um, but I think to summarize, it mainly comes down to the goal of the money, the expectation for the future, and um, the state that you live in, really.
Man, it turns out goals are pretty important, isn't it?
That's
We it's
right.
like every topic, and that's not. I think that's by design, right? I mean, I think if you want to make something personalized, you have to put it into the context of your own situation. That's why sometimes like reading an article online or even watching videos like this are good, but a lot of this stuff does, it takes kind of you need some context, right, to kind of figure out which one could potentially be the best fit. And the last thing I'll say, Zach, is that a 529, one thing that I've seen that can sometimes kind of move the needle for folks to, maybe reconsider a 529. And again, this I'm not saying the 529 is the best. It's probably the most tax efficient potentially because even if you don't get a deduction, it still grows tax free, which is really nice. And then when you take it out for qualified expenses for education, it's tax free, so that's nice as well. But that you can, let's say you save in a 529 for your kid, they get to be 18, you have no other children, and the 529's been open since they were, either before they were born or at birth, then, and that kid says, I don't want to go to college or I'm not going, whatever, that money's not, it can still go to that child in the form of you can roll that to a Roth IRA. Now it's a lifetime limit of 35,000. So I always say, you know, if you're worried about flexibility of 529, get the 35,000 first. And then if you get more than that, then maybe you can think about other options. But, rolling it to a Roth IRA is a pretty good option too. And that can be in your kid's name. So anyways, and the important thing there, it has to be open for 15 years.
Yeah.
So I kind of stress with folks, even if you don't think you'll save a penny in the 529, still could be worth opening one just to get that clock ticking. Because
And
I
they're
like,
so easy to open too.
yeah, there's so you can do it before the kid's born.
Yeah.
And then you can, of course, you can do it when they're born. But either way, I think the point there is that maybe you could open one up, get the clock ticking. You don't have to save anything in it. Then you have options, right? So that was just one extra thing I thought of.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that 15-year clock is the part that's most important there. And just
Hmm.
to reemphasize the importance of even if you're not sure yet what the correct vehicle to save in is, just go ahead and open it because
Yep.
it takes 5 minutes or less to open it online. You can do it at Schwab, Vanguard. Once again, take a look at the state you live in because sometimes, depending on if there is a state income tax deduction for the 529 contribution, maybe you need to open it in that state specific 529.
Right.
Um, Goes back to if you have further questions on this, reach out to Nolan or myself
Yep.
and we can help you figure it out. But they're really easy to set up and get those recurring contributions if that is your goal, started.
Absolutely. Love it. All right, Zach, I think if our listeners or viewers have made it this far in the video, I'm pretty impressed, man. That was a lot of information. Hopefully it was useful, but congratulations to whoever's watching this. Probably means you're expecting or trying to have kids here soon. So that first probably should have said that first off, but congratulations, right? That's a huge deal. That's beyond the finances. That's just awesome. And we put this out to just hopefully that way you don't have to worry about this stuff as much and just enjoy the time with the kiddos, right? With the baby. And so anyways, anything you got, Zach?
Thanks, Nolan, for, it was great to talk to you about some of this stuff because you have very recently gone through a lot of the questions and items that my wife and I are currently going through. So I knew that I wanted to run these questions past you, and I thought, well, you and I work with a lot of clients who are also in
Yeah.
this boat, so it may make sense to record this and have them listen to it. And if they have further questions, once again, reach out to Nolan or myself, not just because we're financial advisors, but also because we're going through it right now. So,
Yeah.
we're figuring it out just like everybody else is. And in addition to some of the financial topics we can touch on, I think it's very helpful to also talk to people who have just gone through the actual life-changing event of having your first kid. And it, can help put some stress at ease and answer some lingering questions you may have. So when they come out, reach out to us anytime. But I think that's all we got for today. So thanks for listening in. And Nolan, once again, thanks for joining me.
Love it. All right. Thanks, Zach.
Leading Edge Financial Planning LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Leading Edge Financial Planning and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.leadingedgeplanning.com. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. These documents may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. All information has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but its accuracy is not guaranteed. There is no representation or warranty as to the current accuracy, reliability, or completeness of, nor liability for decisions based on such information, and it should not be relied on as such.